Welcome to Crying Out Cloud, the podcast that will make you laugh, cry, and reconsider all of your cloud security fears. I'm Eden from the CTO team at Wiz. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Amitai. We are thrilled for the chance to help you help yourself with the deluge of cloud security news. Amitai, what are we going to cover today?
Today we're going to be talking about the recent Azure DDoS attacks.
If you were curious why Starbucks online ordering was down for a bit, stay tuned.
We're going to be talking about DigiCert and an interesting case where they revoked a bunch of certificates at once and gave their customers very limited time to replace them.
That might be the culprit of why some websites you like were down. Maybe, maybe not.
And we're going to be talking about a recent vulnerability in VMware ESXi that was exploited for ransomware.
Which is proof of why trust based on name is a bad idea.
And we'll explain what you mean when we get to that.
It's not that I have trust issues.
Well, you should. I mean, we work in security. It's kind of comes with the business. And finally, we'll be talking about a recent discovery made by Wiz Research about a misconfiguration in SeleniumGreed that was exploited by threat actors to deploy crypto miners.
This one is a kind reminder why you should not assume authentication is enabled.
Correct.
Okay, let's start with Azure DDoS attack. Before I say this, I just want to say that this is what we know today. And by the time this comes to you, maybe there's more information. But the TLDR is that the security world suffered another DDoS attack. This one is interesting because it targeted Azure's front door, which is a CDN offering of theirs. And in theory, like the DDoS itself wasn't so crazy, pretty minimal. But there was a bug in Azure's network configuration that routed traffic wrongly, weirdly. And then it pushed a bunch of traffic to EU servers. So this is all to say that the response by Azure in compensating for the DDoS is what caused the problem. It caused a bunch of congestion. It took down a bunch of servers, including Microsoft 365, for literally 8 hours. Amitai, do we know who did this?
So I think I saw online that there was a group that tried to take responsibility for this. I actually can't remember who they are. They didn't seem very familiar, but it's really hard to actually say that this was them. Like it could have been someone else and they just took responsibility for it publicly.
Interesting. It's also interesting because usually and this might help an attribution of it, DDoS has a goal in mind, which is really unclear what the goal here is, unlike other big DDoS attacks we've seen as of late in the news.
Yeah, that's correct. It's possible this was just someone trying to prove that they were capable of taking down Microsoft. It might have been someone, that Microsoft had annoyed for some reason, or a Microsoft customer had annoyed. It's really hard to know what they were actually trying to do in this case, as opposed to other cases like I think you were telling me about a recent case where there was a thing related to election security recently, correct?
Yeah, the Dutch party websites were attacked as EU voting was kicking off, which was done by a pro-Russian group called Hacknet, which clearly has a very clear intention in mind to impact elections for the European Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, availability of election-related stuff close to election or during election day can be really significant. Like if someone wants to figure out where they should go vote, or they want to know what the weather's going to be like, or they want to take public transport somewhere, you can do a lot of damage and really shake things up if you make those services go offline.
Shame. Another thing you could do if you want to have a lot of impact is take down Starbucks mobile ordering, which is what happened here with the Azure DDoS. So someone was on their way to work and they were like, I want an ice frap, and they did not get their ice frap.
It would be funny if the person at Microsoft in charge of fixing the problems related to the DDoS was on their way and they were waiting in line to get their Starbucks and they couldn't get it, and that ruined their day. They were tired, and that delayed it even more.
Literally a double whammy. Okay, so what is the takeaway of this story?
So unfortunately, in this specific case, customers of Azure, there's literally nothing they could have done because these issues were on Azure's side of the shared responsibility model in the cloud. But if these DDoS attacks were targeting customers, then there's a lot of stuff you can do to defend against DDoS. It's very common. It's a problem that's not necessarily getting worse, but groups that do DDoS attacks, their power grows every year, and like records are breaking all the time in terms of like how much data can a threat actor can throw at one server per hour. But DDoS protection technologies are also, getting a lot better. So it's a sort of an arms race between the threat actors that are trying to do DDoS and the security vendors that are protecting against them. So you have a lot of options these days. And like Microsoft said in their initial postmortem, this wasn't really that big of a deal. It was a completely manageable DDoS attack, and it shouldn't have had the impact that it did.
Okay. For our second story, we have DigiCert and their revoked certificates. So DigiCert pretty much revoked about 85,000 TLS certificates due to a bug in its domain validation process, which caused disruption. Havoc was caused, and customers had 24 hours to replace their certificates. If they didn't, due to the nature of what a certificate is, as it serves as the root of trust on the internet, a bunch of websites would just stop working. This is a very scary thing, especially if it's like a critical infrastructure operator, healthcare, emergency services. And so, quite clearly, it had a very profound effect on cloud customers. What I think is interesting to kind of discuss here is that it's one thing to be notified that these are the certificates you need to renew, but then it's like, where do you go find them? What do you do? What's like how people should be prepared in this world, given the nature of fluctuating or need to renew certificates?
Yeah, so in this case, DigiCert reached out and said, here are the certificates you need to renew. Like you could just go on their portal and check. They also released a file containing the hashes of all the certificates they revoked. I think there were like 80,000 of them. So figuring out which certificates you need to replace that was the easy part. And like you mentioned, the hard part was actually, going into all of the servers where these certificates were being served from and replacing them or replacing them in code. And for that, you needed to figure out where they were actually in use. And let's say, you bought, 1,000 certificates. How should you prioritize which you replace first? Are there any that you can afford to just, let them be revoked and not replace them just because they're not in use? How many of them are being used on critical systems or customer-facing systems? And that's a bit more complicated. You can rely on internet scanning. You can rely on disk scanning, but you need to have some sort of solution in place. And if you don't have that, it gets really hard.
Recently, Google took action against other CAs like Entrust, where they pretty much were like, Entrust not doing a good enough job, lots of problems, not reliable, and then Google just kicked them out. So like DigiCert's acting to want to avoid getting kicked to the curb in the same way that Entrust had been.
Yeah, I think the Entrust case, I'd guess, was very much on the people working at DigiCert's mind. When this came out, they probably were thinking to themselves, if we don't comply with the rules and revoke these within 24 hours like we're supposed to, we run the risk of Google saying, we can't trust DigiCert anymore. Like this whole process is very bureaucratic and very, very strict. But like you say, like at the end of the day, certificates form the basis for being able to trust that you are connecting to securely to websites and that the person on the other end is the person you mean to connect to, or that the company you mean to connect to is actually the owner of this website. And if the people in charge of making sure you can rely on that don't do a good enough job, if they mess up um, too often, and if, when they mess up, they don't take responsibility like they're supposed to, then, the internet falls apart. You can't trust anything. Um, so it's a very difficult decision that they made here, but I guess I don't think anyone can blame them for making this decision. If anything, maybe what needs to change are the rules, because replacing tons of certificates within 24 hours just for some companies just isn't feasible. So maybe the rules should be changed to say 48 hours or a week or something like that. Just something that's a bit more manageable.
There's this announcement that Google came up with, and I sent it to Amitai, and I was like, it was like a bunch of paragraphs, and I was like, they could have just written, with great power comes great responsibility, and that's it. That's like the point of what it means to have authority here. But going back to what you said about 24, 48 hours, actually a lawsuit came out of this from, I forgot who, a technology company, but they were like, hey, 24 hours is not realistic. What happened in this lawsuit?
So yeah, apparently one company decided, or at least one company decided that it would be faster to get a court order preventing DigiCert from revoking certificates than it would be to actually replace their certificates. And they succeeded. Like, they actually convinced the judge to do this, which makes sense, again, because it's kind of nuts. And DigiCert did actually extend the period for replacing them by a few days. So that worked.
But like zooming out in this whole DigiCert saga, what is the impact like in terms of certificates and the scope of the internet that was touched by this, and how does one move forward with this?
So I saw a bit of research someone did a few days ago following this case, where they basically scanned the internet to see how many of these certificates were actually in use, and sort of followed along over a few days to see how well DigiCert's customers were doing at replacing them. So it looks like out of like 90,000 or 80,000 that were revoked, about 14,000 were actually in use. But if you actually look at the number of websites that would have been impacted, just because you have a lot of dependencies, like you have websites relying on websites, it would actually affect in total over 1 million websites, including some really big ones. So the impact here was actually quite significant. And it's actually interesting to see how like only 80,000 certificates could actually impact a much higher number of websites. And also, I was reading through their DigiCert post-mortem, and it looks like they've taken like absolute responsibility over what happened again, because I think they kind of feel like they have to. And the guy who was in charge of the change that actually caused the validation issue to come up, he actually took responsibility completely, and he actually quit, which is like the ultimate taking of responsibility. On the one hand, I think that again goes to show how seriously they're taking this. But on the other hand, I think it would have been nicer if he didn't have to quit, like if he could stay on, because he's probably never going to make that kind of mistake again. He's probably going to be the expert on this stuff for years to come. So good luck to him.
Okay, so let's say you are a user of certificates and you have to be prepared for things of this nature. What should be your takeaways?
I think this goes to show that this might happen again for different reasons, or the same reasons, at the same scale or a larger scale. And it looks like organizations need to be ready to replace certificates at moment's notice, which means you need to have visibility into certificates. You need to have a plan for replacing them. Because again, like, this wasn't a cyber attack, but it still had the same potential impact, because web servers would have stopped working.
It's like when the carpet is slid underneath you.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be prepared for that to happen. I'm not saying, when you're walking around your house, you should be prepared for the carpet to be pulled beneath your legs. But in the cyber parallel, I guess you should be.
Yeah, you can even have spare certs hanging around.
Correct. Like you don't necessarily have to purchase new ones or have be issued new ones like at a moment's notice. You could have like a bunch of backup certificates just in case from a different company, issued in a different way, just so that they're less likely to be affected.
Okay, that's the DigiCert story. For our third story, we have the ESXi vulnerability that was exploited for ransomware. This one's a cray-cray story. So, a big vulnerability was found in VMware's ESXi servers. How does it work? You, as an attacker, could create a group called ESX admins. And simply with that, you would gain admin privileges because ESXi automatically trusted groups with that name. That's a bad idea. And this flaw allowed attackers to escalate privileges. What's interesting to just like put as a caveat here is that it didn't allow you to gain initial access, which means that you would need from the get go a considerable access to the environment um, before you could then leverage this. What are we seeing in the big wide world? How is this being used?
So Microsoft reported that they saw ransomware groups exploiting this as I think as a 0-day. Um, but like you mentioned, these were all cases where the threat actor already had initial access to the environment. They had the ability to either create or modify um, Active Directory groups. And then once they create a group called ESXadmins and add themselves to it or change an existing group's name to ESXadmins that they're already in, they would be able to move laterally into ESXi instances and have high privileges there. What would have been better, and I think that's what VMware changed when they patched this, was instead of trusting the group name, it would trust some sort of unique ID that couldn't actually be faked.
So, who took advantage of this?
Microsoft saw a few groups using this, ransomware operators, including groups they call Storm 0506, Storm 1175, Octotempest, and Manatee Tempest. Octotempest is also known as Scattered Spider, which is a very cloud fluent threat actor. They're very smart and they do a lot of sophisticated, interesting things when they target cloud environments. So it's not surprising to see them using this technique. And again, they used this whenever they had initial access to a target environment.
So, if you are a user of ESXi, is there anything you need to do, or has this been fixed?
So you do need to patch this in order to make this go away, and you should probably monitor for creation of new user groups in Azure AD and in AD called ESXadmin, just because it might be, even if it doesn't work, it might be an indicator of a threat actor trying to exploit this vulnerability.
For our next story, we have SeleniumGreed exploited to deploy crypto miners. This was found by our very own Wiz Research team. Though, what is this? So, SeleniumGrid is a very popular open source framework used for testing web apps. It enables users to conduct tests that would like simulate user interactions in a bunch of different browsers or environments. So it's super popular. Like Selenium is present from our research in like 30% of cloud environments. And apparently the Docker image is more than 100 million pools in Docker Hub. So it's a non-negligible existence out in the cloud. So like a lot of software, it is insecure by default. What does this mean? It means that unless you know what you are doing, you will likely make this mistake and assume that authentication is enabled, but it is not, and you will be in trouble. So how much in trouble will you be, Amitai? What are they doing with the fact that people sometimes assume things they should not assume?
So in this case, if you put SeleniumGrid on the internet, and it's publicly exposed, as in anybody can access it, or anyone can access the server, and you don't mess with any of the settings, then, as you mentioned, it will allow anyone to log in, which is not good because once you log in, you can begin to run commands and you can begin to run processes and you can mine crypto if you want to. So those are the bad things that are going to happen in this case. Like that's what we saw this threat actor was doing, but it might have been worse. It might have been a threat actor that wasn't just opportunistically looking for resources to exploit for crypto mining. It might have been someone trying to steal secrets or data from SeleniumGrid, because that's a likely scenario as well. So in this case, I guess we have the crypto mining threat actors to thank for teaching us about this potential misconfiguration. Yeah.
How many did we find that are internet exposed instances?
So in terms of popularity, we saw Selenium in 30% of cloud environments, which is quite a few. And the SeleniumGrid container image on Docker Hub has over 100 million pulls, and we found more than 30,000 internet exposed instances of these.
Which is huge. Okay, so let's say you were listening and you think you're one of the people that should address your Selenium instances.
Yeah.
What do you do?
So first off, it shouldn't be exposed to the internet. SeleniumGrid is an example of a software that you just shouldn't put on the internet at all. There's no real reason for it to be internet exposed. Secondly, if you have to have it internet exposed for whatever reason, then you need to enable authentication in the configuration. If you think you've been impacted by this, and you think someone has exploited your SeleniumGrid instance to mine crypto, whatever, the best thing you can do is just redeploy those instances from known clean versions. Probably best not to try to just run a malware scan and fix it. It's best to just take it apart, put it back together again, so that you can trust that the threat actor no longer has access.
Okay, so if you're still tuned in and you want to know what you should do and take away as homework, what are the takeaways, Amitai?
So your takeaways / podaways / homework for today, dear listeners, if you are concerned about DDoS, get DDoS protection. And if something like this happens again, there's not much you can do about it. Microsoft needs to get better at preventing this kind of thing from happening again. In this case, it was just a mistake in their network configuration. I hope that by the time this episode comes out, they release a full postmortem revealing what exactly went wrong and what they're doing to make sure it doesn't happen again. If you are a DigiCert customer, and to be honest, if you are any customer of a certificate authority, which probably most people working at companies in our audience are, you need to have a plan ready for replacing certificates at a moment's notice. You need to have like a big button or a script you can run to immediately replace all of your certificates if you need to, because this can happen again. Hopefully, the rules will change and the 24-hour notice will extend to, let's say, 48 hours, which makes a bit more sense. If you are a VMware customer using ESXi, it is important that you patch against this recent vulnerability and be on the lookout for cases where someone tries to create a group called ESX admins, because that might mean that they are trying to exploit this vulnerability, which means that they have access to your network, whether or not you are vulnerable to this or not. And if you are using SeleniumGrid, please do enable authentication in the configuration and prevent it from being exposed to the internet, unless you want threat actors to mine crypto on your machines, which you might. I hope you don't.
Sounds like really good homework. Thank you for listening, and we hope that we helped you understand a little bit more about everything that's going on. If you enjoyed the show, if you learned something new, be sure to subscribe and share a link to our podcast, but not your cloud keys And as always, if your cloud security strategy is making you cry, don't worry, just cry out loud.